Bada bing.
Bada boom. Hi, everybody.
Hey. Nice pickup.
This is a super last-minute impromptu stream because I have one very rare free Saturday night. And apparently Lee did as well. So I'd like to welcome to the channel for the first time, This Crits. Hi, Lee. Who are you? What do you do?
I have a lot of friends, and I'm normally busy on Saturday nights. Trust me. So yeah, he had to beg me to come on, literally all day.
Yep. It was hard work. It definitely wasn't two messages that were like 3 hours apart.
Man, come on. Why you gotta do me like that? Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Well, thanks for being here, man. I'm excited to talk about really any TTRPG stuff with other content creators. We have a project together in the works that is upcoming, but more details will be released soon. Keep an eye on my Twitter. At okayest__DM on Twitter for more announcements. And obviously that'll be announced here too. But anyway, tonight we are just going to talk about big bad evil guys, BBEGs, BBEGs. And
BBEGs. I love that.
That's seriously what I do in my head when I see those letters put together. Who's the BBEG of this campaign?
Oh no, it's Frank from accounting. Ah!
Well, no, Frank from accounting usually wouldn't work, and we're here to talk about why that is. Let's start with, I guess, some stories about campaigns we've run. So how long have you been running tabletop role-playing games?
Sure. The first time, running, I've been probably going for about 5 years now, I think. Honest to God, or 5 or 6 really heavy DMing 5e only. I've only ever DM'd 5e.
Okay.
I played a lot of, I don't know, maybe not a lot. I played 3.5, I played a lot of 5e, and then I played a decent amount of Pathfinder 2. And then pretty much after I played my first 5e game, I transitioned to DMing it, and I really haven't played ever. I've never played a game since I started DMing. It's pretty sad.
Of willing forever DM. Classic.
Yeah, I guess so.
I'm about the same story. When I started playing, I was pretty much immediately the guy running the game as far as 5th edition D&D goes. And that's where... Oh, my cat has the zoomies. Stop.
That's amazing.
Do that.
And featuring your cat.
Yes, this is our channel mascot, Hugo.
Hello, Hugo. That's the BBEG right there behind you.
Yeah, we have a joke about whether or not Hugo is my familiar, or if he's really an archfey posing as my familiar, and I'm his familiar. He hasn't asked me for my name yet, so I think we're still good.
That's if he hasn't asked you for your name, then I mean,
I think we're
sign.
fine. Anyway, I've been running D&D at least about since it came out. So my beginning story has a huge gap in it. When I started, my dad took me to a local game store, and I think it was like an Adventurers League game, and I did not have a good experience. It was 4E, I'm pretty sure. We went into the store, ran the game. I didn't really know what was going on. The rules weren't fully explained to me, and so when apparently the big bad of the whole campaign that this was one adventure was a part of showed up for 2 rounds of the beginning of combat. And I, being a rogue, did what rogues do. I ran straight up to the big bad and stabbed as hard as I could. I missed. The big bad attacked me, because that's what the big bad would do, and crit, and one-shot me.
Of course.
And so 3 failed death saves later, I'm kind of sitting there with nothing to do for an hour while the rest of the table of strangers played around me. And it took me like 5 years after that to try it again.
Yeah.
But when I did, it was amazing. I literally picked up the book, realized what it was, and the first game after that I played, I was actually running. I was running from scrap with no play experience whatsoever,
No
and
way.
boy, was it a fucking mess. It was so bad. But I was doing it with good friends, so we had a good time anyway.
Dude, I've been doing this for 5 years, and I'm still a mess when I DM.
Yeah. Like, the messiest sessions can be the best. But typically when you're planning a big bad, like the huge villain of your whole campaign, you don't really want that to be a mess. I have a whole video on boss fights for big bads and stuff, but what I wanted to talk about here was how to set them up. Like, what separates a final boss from being a campaign-long villain? I think it's that the party knows about them for much, much, much longer than just like the strongest enemy at the end of the dungeon.
Yeah.
I know Matt Colville has a pretty good video on it where he describes this sort of he describes a campaign he ran where the big bad showed up in session 1, like in person. Came to the tavern they were in, did horrible things, oozed power with the DM's description of it, and then left. And the party it was very clear that there was nothing they could do. Like, you looked at the guards in spiked armor, they could barely take one of them, and there was 10 behind this guy. So they immediately had a picture in mind of who they were going to be going after this whole campaign that ended up being like years.
You know, I watched that video when it came out with Matt. I loved it, but I think my favorite video I've ever watched about this specific topic, I think it was Loot put it out. And the best example that I think he gave was, in this minor spoilers, and I'm not going to say any spoilery, but it has to do with this Barovia and Strahd. Right. He goes over the Strahd villain and the big bad and how he kind of builds it up. And the whole thing about that module is that he shows up, he, interacts with people. You might not necessarily know he's a bad guy at first, and then you slowly get to know more and more about him, more and more about the town, the environment. And that's from, like, immediately when you start that campaign. I think that's Curse of Strahd, the new 5e module, right? The first thing that you do is you can get introduced to that guy pretty quickly, and I think it's that, I don't know how many levels that spans, but that's a significant amount of time to build a character, right? Because like a BBEG, a BBEG, if you will, the way I look at it, right, is just like you're building your own character's story, you're building your own character's like flaws and goals. The BBEG also has those, and they can also morph and change as a campaign goes on, and I think that I like the Curse of Strahd because it really exemplifies how you can really work with a character to integrate them into the world, integrate them into your group's party, to make them have an actual relationship with them, whether or not it's, ooh, I hate this guy, or be like, oh, that guy's such a son of a gun, or like, what the heck's this guy doing stealing my socks, or or
even better, have it be a plot twist where they thought this guy was an ally the whole time and they ended up just using the party.
Exactly. There's so many different ways it can go, and I love that video from Flute. It was amazing because he goes over the whole thing, and I've never even run the dang campaign, but watching that video I was like, man, this is awesome. I want to do that.
Yeah. No, I'll have to watch that one. I've seen a lot of Flute's Loot, but I haven't seen that one yet. I know a lot, like Curse of Strahd is like, I feel like it's the most popular of the like big published campaigns from
it's
Wizards
like
of the
iconic,
Coast.
right?
Yeah, by this point it is. I've never run a published campaign. Everything I've ever done from that first game, actually no, that first game I ran was like a free 1-page PDF.
Yeah.
But literally it took me a couple sessions for me to literally just torch the city and rebuild and use that to start the world that I still run games in today.
And that might even be a good thing, though, right? Like, you don't have any preconceived notions about what should or should not be.
And I can't get things wrong, right? If I made it all up.
You didn't know in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's no book to tell me what's actually correct, so I can't possibly be wrong.
That's good.
As far as creating big bads go, I've made a lot of mistakes. I've had, I remember one campaign I ran in college. I made this huge plot about, I think I called it the Karsus clan, where there was this clan of half dragons, people that got turned, like humanoids that got turned into dragon-like creatures. And they were like an evil cult that did all this nonsense. And a god, the goddess of fate, put a curse on them. And the curse was that if they were slain with a non-magical weapon, that weapon would suddenly become a magic weapon and get some random power. So the Karsus clan was bounty hunted to the point of extinction to create these magic weapons. And the whole campaign was hunting the last 5.
That's cool.
It was a really cool premise, but the problem was that was it. There was no like big bad. It was just a bunch of one-off like bounty hunts. I had in my mind like the big bad, the founder of the Karsus clan, this half silver, half black dragon. That like started the whole turn these people into dragons sort of thing, and the only time he showed up was in the final battle. That was it. 5 minutes before roll initiative for the final session, they didn't know who this thing was. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I learned my lesson there. There was a huge missed opportunity that I could have been building up and connecting all of these things together through that one character. And I think that's what a good villain does. It remains like this constant overshadowing thing that connects all of the party's motives into one place.
Yeah, I think that I didn't have your exact experience, but I 100% have experienced that. And I still struggle with it. But I think the number one thing that I have learned in the past years of DMing, right, or the one thing I've struggled with getting past, is it's okay to give players information. You know, you don't have to hide things behind a room sometimes, right? Sometimes narration in itself is information enough to the players to give them, you know, goals or drive. I know my first campaign was a module. It was the stupidest idea. My first campaign I ever ran was Out of the Abyss, which is a very heavy and very heavily debated topic, if it's good or bad. But my second campaign was a full homebrew campaign where I don't think I actually introduced them to the BBEG. It must have been like 50 sessions. Because, you know, as a new DM, I was thinking the whole thing, oh, this guy's a mastermind. He's so smart. He wouldn't be caught doing this. Like, he wouldn't leave trails for the party to know about. He would have people to deal with the people that would make a mess, right? So they wouldn't know his name. They'd know the name of someone who worked for him, who works for that other person, you know? And I made this whole convoluted web of, you know, it made sense in my Giga DM brain, but the players will never see the Giga DM web of everything, right?
Exactly. They'll just see like the one layer that they get exposed to and not the 30 above it.
Exactly. And then once they get to one little node, there's like 4 other ones they can go to, then they follow one, and they miss all these other bits of information, right? It's the same thing with information creep, where people just, like, newer DMs tend to hide their hand really heavily. And the more I DM, the more I'm just like, yeah, his name's Bob. He's a jerk, right? Like, I just kind of throw stuff out at him because
Bob the jerk is now the bad guy. Let's go kill him.
Exactly, right? Like, he kicked my dog. I really don't like that guy. You know, there's your goal. Like, I don't know anyone who would enjoy someone that did that, right?
We got a question from Jackson here. What would you do with a BBEG if the antagonist is nature itself? I sort of did this actually once. In my world, there's a city called Casaria, and it is a city that is half above water and half underwater with a cliff separating them. And the underwater population is mer people, and like, I won't go too far into the city, but you see mer people like flying around or in water wheelchairs on the surface, and then the people that sell caps and potions and necklaces of water breathing make an absolute fortune here because people have to go back and forth all the time because it's the same city. A meteor impacted way off the coast. There was a tsunami that resulted, and it just wiped out the entire city. That was the antagonist for this like mini arc, was an actual natural disaster. I recently saw an episode of The Bad Batch, the Clone Wars animated thing on Disney Plus, where there was an earthquake and a tsunami, and that was the entire antagonist of the entire episode. And it made me realize more missed opportunities for this this sort of mini arc that I ran with a tsunami, where it could have been, it could have explored like search and rescue and the logistical planning of how to recover from something like this, the fear and panic that ensues when you know that everything around you is about to get destroyed. And I think when I actually talked about the meteor and like described it hitting and, wiping everything down, the party wasn't even in the city at the time. They just saw it happen from a distance, which was, an experience in and of itself. You see something just, you see like millions, or probably not millions, but at least thousands of people die. And it impacts you, but we didn't really get to explore that sort of feeling. And it was a group of people that, a group of theater kids basically that I was doing it with. And I feel like I want to go back and redo the meteor that wiped out Casaria so we can actually explore what it's like to have a natural disaster be the villain.
Yeah, I love the story, but his question is really good. Mm-hmm. And I gotta be honest, I'm not super well versed in this, but I love the whole concept of it. My initial thought, right, is something like the BBEG being in nature itself, not have a campaign. So it's like takes the campaign from being a search and destroy to a search and rescue, right? The whole aura, the whole ambience of the campaign isn't, we need to stop and end this and destroy, because what can you do to stop nature, right? At least that's where my initial head goes. Mm-hmm. There's only so much you can do to control nature. The whole thing about nature is it's wild, untamed. It always overgrows everything eventually with time, right? So I guess the whole thing I would think of would be like where they would go, how would they learn to deal with the changes that are occurring? And how would they do that how would they deal with the changes that are occurring in the world, and how would they help society rebuild after the disaster, right? Because I feel like that's the focus of the campaign, whereas the antagonist is not something that you can deal with, right? It's something you have to adapt to,
right? Which
is a whole different style of play. I feel super cool. I'm not big brain enough to do it, but I think tough. That could be a really cool thought, like a whole arc or campaign, right?
A story doesn't really need a villain. What it needs is conflict. And usually that's a villain, at least in the TTRPG space, but it doesn't have to be. I know that there's a lot of the stereotypical nature is the bad guy. It was more like there's a corruption seeping into the land. Like I've seen that 101 times by now. And so I sort of have an idea of where those stories go, what that kind of arc looks like. And to be honest, it doesn't really interest me, but if I were to do it, do that whole corruption in the land thing, I would probably just slap a villain onto it. Like, have a person be like a target, be the reason. I think making nature the big bad is difficult and very ambitious, and I've learned that the hard way.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, conflict is the driving factor in the story, right? You have to have conflict to drive the story forward. Like you said, the big BEG is generally the conflict, and I know what you mean by the corruption part, because I mean I've definitely campaigned like five different campaigns, like, but one of the ideas that I really like to look at or kind of dissect when I'm looking at nature, because I am a fellow druid enjoyer, just favorite class. Okay, I'm just gonna put it out there. I like the whole nature motif a lot, and I like the whole concept of wild untamed. One of the things that I have done multiple times in my campaign is the whole connection between Shadowfell and Feywild. A lot. I really like to mess with the planes, and I really like when the planes interweave and mess with each other. Right? So some of the stuff that I always do is, maybe it's not because of a big bad guy. It's just because, you know, that's the world or the setting that we're in, right? The worlds are more intermingled, the layers between planes of existence are thinner, so they kind of spread out. So maybe there's like a really big, lush Feywild forest with fey creatures in it in the material realm that probably shouldn't be there and probably causes problems, right? But there's nothing you can do to fix that. That goes back to the whole, now we're going to have to eventually deal with it rather than fix it, because there's no fixing stuff like that. So right. I love playing with the, you know, material plane and planes of existence a whole lot. So I generally like to be like, oh, the world's out of whack. How can we fix it? And if we can't fix it, what are we going to do to deal with it? So
it's really interesting that you say that, because that's something I've actually never explored, is like multiple planes. Like, I feel like the material plane has enough shit going on. Yeah. But I am just starting to foray into it with the campaign that I am recording and editing now for a podcast. Is an integration with the Feywild. Like, even in old campaigns, whenever there was a plane shift, it was because I had handed off the DM seat to someone else so that I could play a little bit. We it's funny sidetrack. We found out that the going in between the material plane and the Feywild can screw with time a little bit. The person in the DM seat sort of like did that. Like, we went to the Feywild. He actually did it impromptu, and I'm like, ooh, is this a portal into the Feywild? Are we still around? And he's like, yes. Yep. And so we went to the Feywild, and then we ended the session as we were coming out of the Feywild and back into the material plane. And that, like, in between those two sessions was when I found out about this time skip thing. I rolled dice and realized, wait, they come back, and everything that they had been working towards to prevent has already happened, because minutes turned into years.
Yep.
And I thought that was really cool, just to describe coming back out of the Feywild to see, you know, this port city that they had, known for so long, just a ruin.
Yep.
Or the opposite effect, just like grown exponentially. Like, this is now a city instead of a village. That was a really fun thing to explore. But it's not villains. That's, you know, nature that you would have to contend with, and that turned into the conflict.
My sidetracking again, because it's a fun topic.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Funny you mentioned how your first foray into the Feywild happened. When I was DMing, the first time I went into the Feywild, I knew about the time stuff, but I never really was confident in doing it. But something happened in the campaign where effectively in my homebrew world there is something called the Leylight, which is effectively like a centrum of focused arcane like energy lifeblood for the world, right? Hidden in the mists of time, whatever. And it's part of this giant like tower. It's effectively this big beam that shoots into the sky that creates the atmosphere of the world. But we were at literally like the end of the campaign, like maybe 2 or 3 sessions before the end of the campaign, and they were fighting on top of this against the big bad evil guy, right? So the big bad evil guy says, you know what? I'm done. Takes a spirit bomb and throws it at the nearest city. And that he's like, I'm not dealing with this right now. Go deal with that. So my party, they go to deal with it, right? Now, everyone effectively on top of that was in the range of an explosion at the time. So their whole quick thinking was jump. Now, it's so here's another thing of context. The Leylight that they were fighting at is in its own demiplane. Effectively, it's a demiplane. So they jump off. We have a druid. We have a sorcerer. And we have a cleric with slow fall, right? Or feather fall, or whatever spells. And meanwhile, my fighter is like, turns around, and he says, don't worry, guys, I got this. He charges the big bad guy and just tackles him off the side of the whole ledge, right? And he doesn't have anything to slow his fall. He's just fallen. Now, I'm like, wait a second. He's falling from a demiplane into effective nothingness. I'm gonna do it. So I throw him into the Feywild. And I'm like, we're gonna roll some dice here. He rolls some dice. He eventually comes back next session, like 60 years older, like with some mental craziness, right? So the last session we got to run was the rest of the party's still there, like in the moment, like trying to deal with this giant, spirit bomb about to explode the city. And the guy comes back like, I'm here! All nuts. But that was the last campaign, so magic DM, he appears there, but whatever. But yeah, he's this old 60-year-old man now, because he just did this really cool heroic thing, effectively saved the party from dealing with the big bad evil guy, and then shows up super old man because of the timey-wimey mumbo-jumbo stuff.
Yeah.
I love Planes of Existence, man. They're so much fun to screw around with.
They can be, yeah.
Yeah.
We also got Fred in chat. Hi, Fred. We were talking about you off stream later. Don't worry, all good things.
They were.
We are currently off track from talking about bad guys and villains that spread across entire campaigns. How to run them badly, how to run them well.
A lot of experience running them badly here.
Yes, we are experts in badly running
I was saying whatever.
No, right, I am too. Like my channel's thing is these are the mistakes I made, and this is what I learned. One of the good things I've done with villains, though, is there was this. It doesn't really matter but for context, we called it the Void Master. That was his name. He ended up. They didn't find out what exactly it was for a while, but it ended up being like this dragon-esque, Lovecraftian creature from in between space. And it was. They knew that it was the cause of the civil war that had spanned the whole campaign. And they knew that they were going to have to take it on eventually. They just didn't know who it was posing as. So I had like little tidbits of like mentions of the Void Master in several different areas. I tried to make it like once per session. I didn't quite get there.
Mm-hmm.
But like I think an important aspect of being able to have a villain that truly spans the whole campaign and is always on the players' minds is that they have to keep coming up and often. If they don't appear themselves, they have to be talked about. If the players aren't talking about them, have an NPC talk about them. And I find that has worked for having the players consistently reminded of their goal, whether it's a villain or a natural disaster.
100%. I think in my latest campaign, I tried to do something different with my villain, right? And I have this weird amalgamation in my world where I take like little things I like from, Faerun and Forgotten Realms. I'm like, I like that. Pop that in my little world. I like this. Pop that in there, right? So the big bad evil guy in my current campaign, if you're watching it, it's not a spoiler because he's already out there. His name's Larlock. He's this really bad evil lich bro. If you haven't looked at him or read it about him, read it. His story's super cool. But effectively, the whole campaign, we're at episode, I think we're at like 97 now. Where the campaign started out and nothing was known about him. It kind of incrementally got higher, going through, you have like character arcs or story arcs, right? Like you're watching an anime or you're watching a TV show, season 1, season 2, season 3. The whole thought process of this campaign that I was running was to try and make season 1, season 2, season 3. Okay, season 1, focus on this. Season 2, okay, focus on this, but you start to learn more about this thing. Season 3, it builds and builds and builds and builds until eventually you hear and learn and you're like, well, what is this terrible thing I keep hearing about? And then you get that introduction, that initial first introduction after hearing whispers and rumors and little tidbits of information. You're like, oh, snot, that's what we've been hearing about. And then the rest of the campaign's all focused around that.
And it's in that moment, I find it is better to actually explicitly state, you recognize this person as Larlock. This big bad evil lich that you've been hearing about for the rumors and whispers about. Just actually say that in the campaign. Don't assume that the players are going to be able to connect the dots, because then you will have that one moment where everyone has the realization within seconds of each other, and that's way more fun than one person gets it and everybody else is kind of in the dark.
Yep, 100%. And that moment too, and that's your moment as a DM to ham it the fuck up, dude.
Yep.
You just go through it and you're like, go! And you just keep talking. It doesn't have to make sense, but if it sounds dramatic, if it sounds intense, your players are going to be sitting there with their mouths on the floor, regardless of if you stumbled over your words or not, man,
Right. And if you really are worried about that, you can do what I've done in the past. And I've actually planned out meticulously the readouts for their actual, when they appear. For the Voidmaster, I actually timed it to music. If you ever seen,
me too. Yes,
yeah, and I actually make the words right at the, and I practice it outside of the session. I probably go a little bit too hard out, but the result was worth it. Yeah. I'll have to post the audio clip of it somewhere because it was before we had good audio equipment, but you could still hear the music in the background all grainy and crappy, and it still sends shivers down my spine when I listen back to it. We used, if you've seen Fantasia 2000, the Firebird suite. That was the reveal when the volcano begins erupting, the actual erupting. That's the music we used for the Voidmaster's transformation from a man into a Lovecraftian horror, and it was amazing.
That's another thing too, is if you want to just build ambiance, man, music. Music makes the game so much better, and I don't even understand it fully. But if you just have a really good soundtrack for those important moments, man, you're like. You could be introducing Mario, and you could describe it his dark red hat. You see a sinister M upon it as he turns to face you, and you have this sinister, terrible, dark music. You're like,
you could be saying
that son of a bitch
stuff.
just described Mario.
Yeah. Fred, or How to RPG in chat has a good point. Those of you that are watching right now, after you're done with this, go check out his channel. He does a whole bunch of really cool live streams on world building. At least that's what he's been doing mostly. Long-lasting villains need better escape plans than the players can deal with. Absolutely. I have run into that problem so many times where like, oh, I guess they're actually gonna kill the big bad early. Now what? I have to make a new one that doesn't have as much lead up at the end.
Hold on, I'm calling plot armor line.
Yeah,
Hold
exactly.
On. Plot armor.
The problem I had with like showing the villain and having them show up in person too early is the player's attack. And I still have a bad habit of like running monsters kind of easy because I don't want the players to die. It's something I'm trying to kick because
Get over it.
I really need to like just like I don't care if you still live. Your death is gonna be epic. So the villain like doesn't get away, gets captured or gets killed. Another issue that is almost like the same thing is I can remember twice when I had the villain's monologue, right? Like he's in person and he's supposed to win this combat, or like he is like staying there, not necessarily saying how great he is and soon he'll rule the world, but like actually giving the party important information and letting things slip, and the party members don't want to listen, they just want to kill him. It is, I find, very difficult to get the players to not do anything. Twice now, I've had players like interrupt and just like cast silence on him, or shoot the first arrow, or one of them was monologuing after he had reached 0 hit points and someone just walked up and delivered the finishing blow in the middle of a sentence, and they didn't get the information that I planned to drop on them, and now I have to figure out a different way to do that. It's kind of difficult to hold the players back when the big bad is in front of them. That is a constant that I have had to find ways around instead of like fixing outright. Nothing I've tried has been able to like put them on a short enough leash where they won't kill the thing I've put a lot of work into, you know? I
mean, I don't know about your group. My group, with the exception of like 2 of them, are pretty much murder hobo. We're like, not in the sense that they kill everything, but like they never give an opportunity to hear things. They're just like, if they make their mind up on something, they just do it without a second thought, which can be good and terrible. I have come to the conclusion, and my whole, and I see Fred in the chat, he says cloning.
Yep.
I have decided that if it is not proper in the story right now for the big bad evil guy to die, I will never place him in front of them, because the players are much more powerful than you think they are, and they generally have a response for pretty much anything you can do. That being said, I am a little cheater a lot of the times, and I like to give my villains a lot of leeway in terms of what they can do. That aren't necessarily tied to action, bonus action, because let's be honest, you know, whether or not you're using an action, a bonus action, or even a legendary action for that matter, right? Like, the players, there's 4, 5, 6 players, whatever you have, versus 1 bad guy, and, you know, 3 skeletal minions isn't going to make a difference between you and the party, right? So, I have learned to not throw my big bad evil guy in front of the players without a 100% foolproof plan of him getting out should things turn south. Because I had that exact same thing happen twice in this campaign, where the players just wipe the freaking floor with them before they even get a chance for like 3 rounds of combat. And that's not because the guy was underpowered. That's just because of the rolls, and they jumped the gun. They were ready to go, right? And that's a fault of my own as a DM, not a fault of the players.
Mm-hmm.
So I've learned to not put him in situations where he could possibly die. That wouldn't make sense, And that cloning is a big thing because simulacrum. That's the easy DM's way out, right?
Yes. I feel like sometimes that's too easy though, like cloning and reincarnation. Like as reincarnation's great, so they come back in a different body, don't recognize them, and start doing a new plan and everything. But like if the big bad is killed and then comes back, it's kind of, I don't know. This is just probably just my players, but it might be yours too, whoever's watching this. But I have an issue with players getting like a little bit butthurt when the thing they killed comes back and isn't dead. Like, what'd we do all that work for? Kind of mindset. It doesn't like cause serious problems in the game, but it feel like if I could make them have different emotions, just in this conversation, I've thought of another way out that I could have used in any scenario where they kill the big bad too early. The big bad's first form sheds away, and you see his second form, and now he has a +5 to everything, and on top of all of his other bonuses. An extra action, legendary action, whatever you want to throw onto it to make sure that they cannot do it again right there in that moment.
Yup, 100%. Well, here's the thing too, is if it does get to that moment, is the most important thing you can do is, if it does get to that moment, is narrate it in a way that's not like, okay, he falls over dead. Right? like you narrate it.
The end. Thanks, everybody.
Exactly, right?
Goodbye. See
He's
you next
dead.
week.
And then he comes up, 5 sessions later. Wait, we stabbed him to death, right? That doesn't make sense, right? The way I narrated it in my campaign was my campaign's all over the place. As I talk about it, I realize how freaking messed up and mashed up
Don't worry,
it is,
that's every campaign.
But it has some elements of demon lords and fungal rot, and Zugtamoy, the demon lord of fungal rot, whatever. And the party knows that heavily. So when they killed him initially that first time, that they weren't supposed to kill him, but they killed him, I had him kind of like just sludge monster out. He melts like a freaking wizard. But that made sense to the players because like they knew he was experimenting with this stuff to empower himself or other people, right? Like, it made sense. So it still didn't feel good when they learned he came back, but when they learned he came back, they're like, God, I knew I should have set that thing on fire. It's like the typical zombie thing, like you double tap the head, you gotta set the body on fire or it's not staying down. Same kind of thing. If it makes sense in the moment, and if you can like rationalize it in a way, I feel like that's a good way out of it. But I definitely get it doesn't feel good to just pull it's a clone card, because I'd be pissed.
Yeah. And Grand Old Dwarf says, if they're a caster, make them an illusion. Brilliant.
100%.
I actually wasn't the one that did that. I was playing in a campaign where someone did that. And the big bad caster at the end was an illusion. And it wasn't our first meeting. It was our first, second, and third meetings. Was, you're an illusion. You're not actually here. I think that that is a great way to get around the whole interrupt with combat, try to dispel the illusion. No, just counterspell right there. You can't do this. I
like what Fred said.
There's
an
always
endless line of bosses.
of sub-bosses that were the main villain that died early. Players can't figure that out. Like, oh, you're just working your way up the ladder.
Exactly.
When in reality, you thought this one was the big bad. Okay, now this one's the big bad. Oh, shit, they killed that one too. And then make another one.
Yep, exactly. Oh, yeah. Man.
It is hard to make a good campaign-spanning villain. I've been doing this for 9 years now, since 5th edition came out, pretty much. And I still find it difficult. The more and more I find things to inspire my storytelling, though, I feel like it's getting better. Like watching movies or TV shows, like just watching, like go back and rewatch like the original Star Wars and actually look at the character of Darth Vader. You don't get a whole lot of him, but he's a perfect example of like a very well done villain. Like there's a reason he's, you know, on the thumbnail of every single villain video on YouTube, you know? Is like he was so well written, and you get to see like that first, like the first moment where he walks through the mist onto the ship, with, you know, his guards flanking on either side. You can tell that this guy's important, this guy's powerful, this guy's bad. And even the first interaction he has with Leia on that same ship, you know, they're having the conversation, and just from their, you know, it's partly the actors are great. Like you can tell by the voice and the body posture who actually has the power in this situation. And you don't see a whole lot of Darth Vader in the rest of the movies. You see him like a couple of other times, like maybe twice at each one. But you're constantly aware of his presence. Like they keep talking about it. And that we're back to that, you know, you have to keep reminding the players, like name dropping the big bad, like every session at least, if you can. It super helps.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, because, like you said, he's only ever seen once or twice per movie.
Yeah.
Right. But that initial interaction or that initial introduction is enough for the viewer to realize the importance of this one person, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't even have to watch Star Wars and you know who Darth Vader is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just the character.
Spoilers, Luke's father.
Why? We're gonna get canceled now. Yeah, the one DM skill that I still am terrible at, but I'm really, really working on, is narration. Because, like you said, when you were just describing, you know, the entryway of Darth Vader, right? We as DMs, we have to do that with our voice. We have to do that with words, not with visuals, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to make people visualize that Darth Vader walking in there without people actually seeing it, you know?
This is one of the reasons that I do so many like readouts. And by readouts, mm-hmm. I mean like I write down a paragraph or two of description of like the entrance of an important character, just them walking into a room. Like I will do that. I will spend like a couple of hours on it, and the content that it actually creates for the players is only me reading through it once. That's it.
Yeah.
But if you want it to have the effect, that's kind of the work you have to put in, especially if you're just starting out. And like when I was starting out, I didn't know how to describe things. I tried to do it on the fly, and I screwed up so many times. Like I said, oh, that would have been such a cool thing to say, like 2 hours after they had all gone home.
Yup.
And that's why I started actually like writing things out, and you know, when the moment came, I would just read off of the piece of paper or off the screen.
I did the same thing, and with writing out like little bits of important plot points for people to hear, because I wanted to make sure I got it perfectly, and I also had the music timed with it because, you know, mm-hmm. I have mental problems. But How to RPG, he brought up the Curse of Strahd again.
Yep, we were talking about that earlier.
Yeah, before you got here, we were talking about that. And I was talking, and this is actually what Flute's video talked about, is giving the players something to visualize, because the book does a good job of introducing Strahd continually, right? Like it does a very good job of, you know, the players interacting with him, but it doesn't do a very good job of building his character aside from he's a smug jerk, right? But Flutes takes the video and literally goes into pretty deep diving into like what you can do to build the character and that character's relationship with the rest of the players. And Strahd is a perfect example of that. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to, like, even if I don't run Curse of Strahd, I'm gonna have to get that book and figure out why it's so freaking popular.
I
Everybody
bought the
is
book because of him, because
because of
I
Jordan's
watched that video and I'm like, that sounds so cool. I gotta try that. And I thought it'd be great practice too, because it's something I really need to work on. You know.
Yeah.
So.
And that's another thing about DMing. Like, if you, like, one of the ways you can very quickly jump from being a newbie DM to an experienced one without, like, going through all of that, like, I have 10 years of training under my belt. I've been doing this for 2 decades. You can just have, you know, as long as you recognize your mistakes and go outside of your way to find new things to try, you will get better. And I promise there actually is, like, merit to having done this for 20 years, because you've been doing 20 years of that, you know, of constantly just going on adventures with your friends and doing it wrong and figuring out how to make it better. I promise, Fred, I am not jabbing at you for being older than us young upstarts.
Back in my day, I used to run Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Which actually is fantastic. I have not played it, but I have several live streams going through just like one of the books, and there's some wild stuff in there.
Yeah, I've never played, like I said, I've only played 3.5, 5e and Pathfinder 1 and 2. That's all I'm not dead yet. Oh, no! Oh, man. That's great. But yeah, I've every time I go to like an old bookstore, I look for those. I have a couple of, like, I start and collect older D&D books and just peruse through them. I found a really cool one. I can't remember what it's called, and I don't have it down here because it's upstairs. But I found a really nice one that was all about, well, I don't know if it's true or good or not, but it was a book about, like, based on, like, Japanese culture, and just, like, their weaponry and their society and it was a D&D book, and it was just threw in a whole nother layer to the thing. And I'm never going to use it, but, like, it's just cool to see the mindset of the whole, like, what it originally started as, right?
Mm-hmm. Cultural influences into role-playing games is a whole thing. Like, just go look up the game Coyote and Crow.
Oh, jeez, you're gonna have to spell that.
Let's put it in the chat. It's Coyote, and Crow.
Coyote and Crow. Oh, I did not hear that at all. Okay, I'm glad I asked.
But it's I think that's how it's spelled, and it is it's an RPG about it is high concept America in sci-fi if Western colonization never happened. So it is sci-fi with Native American culture integrated into it. And I have not seen gameplay of it, but I want to. I just need to go look at it. I really want to play it myself. It is probably the top on my list for games to play when I finally have the time.
Good luck.
There's a lot of really cool ways to integrate different cultures into D&D. I think we've gotten far enough off track at this point, though. We'll go on a quick break. I need to refill my water quick, and we will be back in 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, works for me.
Cool. See you guys in a 5-10 minutes.
See you. So
And
anyways,
we're
I
back.
said, that's not my wife.
And we are back from our break to talk more about bad guys and how to make them good.
Good. Making a good bad guy. It's
Making
great.
a good bad guy. It is what I put on the thumbnail, I think.
it's the greatest confliction of words.
And honestly, that is one of my favorite character arcs, both inside TTRPGs and outside of them, is having someone switch sides, essentially. Either, or like having one big double cross. Not like a heist movie where there's like 4 or 5. Oh no, it was this person, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But having, you know, their ally either turn on them in the moment or have planned all of this from the beginning. And the opposite, someone that they perceive to be the bad guy has actually been on their side, or like the whole bad guy turns to be good in the moment doesn't usually work, because you know, then there's the whole forgiveness thing that doesn't work out in most cases. But finding out that the villain was actually a good guy the whole time could be fantastic. It is on my to try list, but I have had allies turn into villains, and it is a lot of fun to have a trusted friend betray the party.
Oh my, yeah, 100%. There's nothing better than stabbing them in the back with an assassin at 2 a.m. when they're all sleeping, and then saying roll a death saving throw, and they're panicking. Why? What happened?
Well, you'll find out, or everyone else will, and you'll be dead.
Exactly.
The one story I have about that, and the reason I like it so much, is actually has both of them. So there was this, the party was traveling with this super high level ranger. And I forgot why he was allied with them or what his reasoning in the moment was. But he spent like several sessions with them. And in combat, how I ran having a high level NPC with them is they just didn't appear. You know, the ranger went off stealthed, and then, you know, when the combat was over, they found a couple arrows in the bodies that they didn't realize had been shot in the first place, showing that this NPC is very, very good at their job. Or he'll, like, drag in an extra dead body that they hadn't found or something.
Yep.
And so he had been doing this for several sessions, interacting with him, super jovial guy, you know, just wants them to succeed. And in the night, he stole their bag of holding, which had like 75,000 gold, or some crazy number like that. Everything they had. And left a note in its place that said, I dare you to come find me. I will kill you all. And the party freaked out. They were, you know, this was early on in my DMing experience. The party had put a lot of value on gold, more than they did on the story, so I had to find a way to put the gold into the story. And they suddenly turned, their opinions of Ellenwell just turned on a dime, and there was like, okay, we need to freaking kill this guy.
Get him!
And so they were chasing him. He does this super high level stuff, casts water walk, and runs across the water to an island while the party has to wait and charter a ship.
Yep.
And they go to an island, and it's this like shrine. They have an epic, like really, really cool final battle against him. And then when he drops to 0 and he's dying, they're like, you have the zoomies so bad today, don't you? So they get to the island, and he is, with his dying breath, explains that he had been cursed. The reason he was so powerful is because he is like 1,000 years old, and he was cursed to live in eternal pain. And the way that he would get uncursed is to be killed by people he had betrayed in this shrine. And it is the first time I got players to actually cry at the table. It's like, oh God, we helped you along, but it's such a sad story. You've been in pain for hundreds of years, and I'm glad we helped you out of it, but you had to betray us, and everything makes sense, and the emotions were high. And it was a very, very interesting first foray into a double cross for me, and I think it worked out really well. And the couple I've done since then have been equally interesting and entertaining.
Yeah, that is a like perfect example of perception, right? Taking things, flipping it on upside down, and then flipping it right back to where it was again, right? You totally mess with your player's perception of everything that's going on in the world, and then, they never know what to expect. But that right there is beautiful. Chef's kiss.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I love that stuff. I honestly, it's really difficult to do that well, right? It's incredibly difficult to do that in a way that's meaningful. Like, that is a perfect example of a, friend, all of a sudden, we hate him. And then all of a sudden, well, now I'm not mad, but now I'm sad. You take them through this range of emotions that, you were not ready for. And then someone cries and you feel great. Because you just made some of your friends cry.
I made you cry.
That is my goal as a DM. If you can make your players cry one way or another, as long as you're not calling them names, it's generally good. But I think that in situations when you're trying to build that relationship between the character and the big bad evil guy, it's very difficult to find that balance, right? Between, you don't want to be cliche, in the sense of, this tragic backstory villain that you can kind of understand, and he's doing this for whatever reason, right? You want to make your players question if they're on the right side sometime. And, your example is great, but that's not making them question if they're on the right side. Another way you could go about it is, like, as they get more information about what's going on, they start to question their own morality, in the sense of, like, maybe the big bad evil guy did something like, I don't know. Maybe a whole town trusts him. Maybe he's the mayor of a town, and he's done nothing but good for the town, and everyone in the town trusts him. So when you go to confront him, the townsfolk that are just literal townsfolk are like, leave him alone. He's very nice. He helped me with my groceries the other day, And then the players are combating with themselves, like, well, this guy, he kicked my dog, but he helped this old lady across the street. Right? So you don't know what's real and what's not, and I feel like playing with your player's perception is the key to kind of making that whole thing work. And shit, that is the hardest thing you can possibly figure out, right?
Hard.
It's very difficult to do.
It's like actually filtering, like, it seems like it would be easy. You're the DM, the players only see what you put in front of them, but it's so hard to filter it into the right stuff. I don't know why. It takes a lot of practice, and I know that I have a lot to learn, constantly trying to improve and get better at it. Yeah.
I think one of my favorite things I ever did is, or one of my favorite villains that I ever made was actually a minor, where effectively he was, going back to the campaign that I was just talking about, he was part of an experiment with the big bad evil guy. And he was like this leader of the villain, this bandit group. They called themselves the Jagged Fang, and leader of the bandit. The whole thing is they were effectively like lycanthropes that were cursed for one reason or another. He was cursed because of an experiment that the big bad evil guy was doing on him. Didn't go so well. He doesn't like the big bad evil guy, but he's still a super strong villain in his own right. Not as strong as the big bad evil guy, but he's like a mini boss effectively, so he's still pretty strong. But long story short, he doesn't like the big bad evil guy, but he's still a problem for the player characters. So they kill him. Lo and behold, they find out. They go to guy's house or his keep or hangout. They kill him. And then they find a diary and, a small girl who's comatose. It turns out the big bad evil guy cursed his this mini villain's daughter or nephew or whatnot, and was effectively, I don't remember what the word is, but pushing him to be like, you got to do this, or your kid's gonna be asleep for the rest of her life.
Yeah, blackmailing.
You know what I mean? Blackmailing, that's the word, right? And it's something so simple, but when they read that, they're like, the guy didn't really attack us at all. Like, he didn't cause any problem. He was just stealing stuff. We just killed someone who was just trying to save his kid. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And that moment that broke my players for a bit, where they're like, we just killed someone who didn't deserve to die. And now we're responsible.
Realize for the first time that just going up and killing the bad guy is sometimes a bad thing. Is wild. Like, the first foray into that murky gray area is tough. It does get harder when they have experience in that area to play around with their emotions, unless they stream TTRPGs or act for a living. Then they will open up to that very easily and continue to do it over and over again because that's what they enjoy. But it's fun to spring it on the players. There's one that I wish I had found a way to impress on the players that killing this beholder was actually a bad thing. It was back to earlier. The beholder was the villain I mentioned before that was trying to monologue with his dying breath and just got killed.
Yes.
And it was like, guys, there's information there that you need, and now he can't give it to you. I never said that, never told them about it. I had to rework around, get that information to them some other way. But I had figured out geographically that, there's this country over here that just went through a coup and is currently under martial law and is trying to invade the home country over here that's having its own civil war. In between was the beholder that had control of several orc clans, and it was acting as a barrier between these two countries. The beholder got killed, the orc clans dispersed, and this country just wiped them all out and invaded. And they never put that together, that because they killed the beholder, their country got invaded. And I never was able to impress that upon the players in a meaningful story way. And it's just something that never came to fruition. And that is okay. I learned from my mistake that having stuff like this, I need to find a way to put it into the story instead of just marching them along a pre-planned path. It's okay to deviate a little bit, to put in interesting and important roleplay stuff like that.
That's actually, what you just said, or what we were talking about before, where, people just jump the gun before you can get in that important plot information or whatever, right? That example I just gave with the guy who wasn't really a villain, but was a villain to the people, I made that encounter the way I did because of multiple instances of my players jumping the gun. Because I was like, you know what? If I put this guy in front of them monologuing, they're just going to go at it again, right? That's just how this is going to go.
It's a lesson that you need to learn the hard way. And I feel like a lot of DMs do. So if you're listening to this and you haven't done that yet, don't. It is a horrible mistake, and it feels bad when it is. There are a few times when what you have written actually does truly get wiped out by the player's actions, instead of the players just take the left fork in the road. You still have this whole adventure to save for later. But this one one monologue about this specific situation has one chance to be said, and if the players kill him or start combat, that won't happen. So have a contingency plan for that. That is what we both have learned the hard way.
Player consequences, baby. And the important thing about that players impacting the world is it sucks because your example is so good, but your players are never going to know that it happened that way, right? And I had a much smaller example of that, where literally the first session, in my campaign, in not this one but another one, where they're and it is attacked by orcs. They defend it, blah blah blah. But there's a hole in the tavern that got burnt from some fire. Someone falls down it. They find a sack of 50 gold. Yeah, they go, take it, whatever. Head out of the town, whatever. They save the town, kill the orcs, save the inn, and then they run off. That 50 gold was meant to pay the guards to guard the town from the next orc raid, which then wiped out the rest of the town. But the player's never going to know that. So learning, having those bits of information in there is cool for DMs because we have a gigabrain web mind, right? But finding ways for your players to learn that information is the most important part, because if not, you're just writing a book in your own head.
Yeah.
And no one's going to get to enjoy it aside from you, and you're like, I'm so smart. Meanwhile, no one learns. No one knows how smart you are.
Exactly. It is an epidemic. I think you hit the topic on the nose there. It is so important to figure out a way to get what is in here onto the table and out, so for the players to experience as well.
That isn't monologuing. Blah, 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 blah,
right.
Blah, blah,
you need
blah,
to figure
blah.
out a different way to do it other than monologuing, or like a lore dump, because those are boring. Those are so bad. Like, whenever I have players going to the library to look through stuff, you see this on Critical Role all the time. Like, people are interested, they're taking notes, but they're professionals. This doesn't usually work at most tables. You can't just read out at one person and keep everything on them and they're not in combat, right? People at that table sit in still silence for an hour, saying nothing, doing nothing, having no input. Most players don't want to do that or can't do it. That's why you need to find an interesting way. It's the constant epidemic of DMs is making your world interesting to the players.
Yeah, I think little things like you mentioned, Critical Role is their acting. Bottom line, right? I don't know this, but they're paid to do that, right? That's what they're there for, right?
Yeah.
We're just here to have fun, and people are, texting on their phone, doing whatever things. You need to find ways to work information into the game, right? That isn't just you speaking at people, right? Like that, exactly. A good example of main villains is the James Bond books and movies where the player asks the villain questions. Yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways to go about it, right? It's tough because if the players, you need to get your players need to be invested enough to want to find information but if they're not, that's kind of where I started off with this. Way back when we first started this, I mentioned that I used to have a real big trouble getting information in front of the players because I used to hide it behind a role. The more and more I DM, I've learned, what? If information is pertinent or they would learn it already, and I just tell them. Just as you're going through the campaign, narrate it in a way that's important. Narrate it in a way that's you would know that, this city does fishing stuff and their main export is fish because you live here, right? It's a big fishing town.
Right, but you can't just tell them that this is a big fishing town. That factoid in and of itself is super boring. Exactly. You need to wait for that to be important to them. If you can, wait until they ask about it. If they ask about it, then they're absolutely interested. I keep having this one point that I want to say and I keep forgetting it. But asking about when players actually ask questions about it, that is the ideal time to start telling them the answers.
Yes.
If you have one player, my favorite, easiest way to get around this is to make something interesting to a player is I identify the players that put a lot of effort into their characters' backstories, right? You have this uncle that you're running from, or your parents are helicopter parents. Involve that in the story and try to involve it in the larger plot as well. So what I do is I find the player that put the most work and most effort into their story, and I make someone from their backstory the big bad of the campaign. And that's like, that is an excellent starting point, because then at least one player will always be super invested. And if you do it well, the rest of the players will get invested with them.
And if you have a player that doesn't do a backstory or does the cliche amnesia stuff, fuck their shit up, yo. Hey, ruin them.
Yeah. It's like, and I don't have amnesia very often, but I do have one player who tends to write boring backstories, and he has a very good reason for doing so. His explanation is that he would rather live through the character's story than write it beforehand.
That is wonderful.
Uh-huh.
That's great.
And when he told me that, it literally blew my mind. I never had, like, considered that as an option before. Like, that is the obvious answer. Like, you don't want to write this story. You want to live this story. That's why we're here. So let's live the story. As a quote-unquote excuse for not writing a backstory, I don't really like it, to be honest, because, like, backstory is, yes, it's a little bit more effort, but it fleshes out your character and
wow, do you know how much effort I put into it?
Gives it gives the DM a platform to build your story up on instead of having to do it from scratch, you know.
Yeah.
But it still works.
Definitely. I think the one thing, whenever I do backstories with players, I always ask for a couple of things specific. I give them this, like, map, right? And I say, here, this is the map of the world. Okay. You are starting here. Okay. This is, you know, it's a city that does this, and this, and this. I need to know what would bring you here. And I need to know, 3 to 5 characters in your backstory at least. That's all I require. You can give me more if you want, but I need people in your history, if you have them. I'd really like 3 to 5. And why would you be here in this town? That's all I ask. I don't think that's too much to say you've written a story for them already, but it gives them enough of an attachment or an introduction to being tied into the world that isn't, you've already had a grand adventure, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I like I don't ask for 3 to 5. I ask for 1 NPC in your backstory, please. But I think the why you are here is very important to ask players when you're starting out, for sure. It gets rid of a lot of work for you to do.
Yeah, 100%. That's creating a backstory was done between levels 1 to 4 in older versions of the game. You just need to answer 4 or 5 questions. So it was done. So effectively, what his player was saying is
that makes sense because he liked the older versions. Maybe that's why.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I like I said, I played 3.5 forward, so I don't know anything past before that. But yeah, who knows?
Yeah, that makes sense. Because your character's story doesn't start until they leave home, But our whole story doesn't start until they arrive at the location. So that is one responsibility that it is totally fair to put onto the players, is how did your player get from this place to starting location, and why did they leave? That's another really big question that I like to ask them. They don't have to answer it, but I find it really helps, especially new players, flesh out their characters more, is why did you leave your hometown?
Yeah.
There's a whole questionnaire that I have written out that I am constantly tweaking. And most of the questions are about backstory. Like, why did you leave? Why are you here? There's a question in there about, like, family, just to, like, jog their mind. There's even a question in there about what does your character think happens to people after they die? To, like, get a little bit of culture intertwined in it, because I enjoy doing that. Is like having people, when they visit different cities, they are experiencing a new culture, and that is something I'm continuing to work on, which is ironic because I've actually never been outside of the United States.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Whenever I'm working with player backstories, I've just started recently doing the "Why are you here?" thing. You know, why did you come to this station and ask NPCs? Because, you know, after not getting backstories for a while, it's kind of like, how do I get you in this world?
Mhm.
But like, I have my current players. Well, maybe not my current. Yeah, my current. Their backstories are all over the. You know, one of them I got literally a 1.5-page document of information.
Love that.
And it was great. And I ruined her. But I loved her backstory because her name is Kate and she plays Warlock Paladin. And she's got like a family of like southern overbearing mother and aunt. So the whole thing is like every time they either see them or they don't talk for a while, she's like, Posey, where have you been? You know, and that's the relationship with her mother is like overbearing and loud, but every time she's like, I'm sorry, mama. You know, and it's just hysterical because it's not something you always see in a character. You always see the tragic backstory, you always see all this other stuff. But
you get to see the comical, wholesome stuff too.
It's great. And I got that whole thing, and then guess what I did? I killed her dad. Well, no, she didn't have a dad. Well, she had a dad, but there's a lot of into it. All right, but it's so much fun. Screw player backstories. We're on a tangent again. I'm sorry.
Well, we're gonna answer Fred's question here, and then I think call it for a night because this question could sustain us for a while. But what are the most important questions to answer about a character before going on adventure? Mm-hmm. Number one for games that I like to run is probably what does your character look like?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a game where you are playing around in your imaginations. We are going to need a visual to help us put that character in the world that I'm describing. And even for like one shots, that's the minimum that I need. Is like you need to be prepared for when I ask you what your character looks like.
Yeah,
that's my number 100%.
And that's interesting because a lot of people don't do that. You know.
Yeah.
You know, at the table they sit down and you want to describe your character, and they're like, "Oh, I'm a dwarf with a beard." You know. But having that actual like description is that's a good one. I've actually not thought of that. Aside from the, you know, why are you in the town you're currently in?
Yep,
and
that's an important one.
You know, your familial relationships is another big one. If you have familial relationships, right?
I think we can combine why are you here and why did you leave into sort of the same question.
Yeah.
So that's 3.
I guess those are the only 3 I would really want. I need some other questions. I would love some history on, and this is not absolutely need. It's just a thought experiment here. Like, why are you a paladin? Why are you a druid? What drove you to do that? You know? I think that is a whole nother thing where, you know, it's not writing their adventure, but it's writing the prologue to their adventure, right? Like,
where did you get your power from?
Yeah, exactly. That's boom.
Because it qualifies for marshals as well. Like, did they get trained? Did they pick this up on their own? Everyone always chooses on their own, but you still have to ask the question.
Exactly. Yeah,
but yeah, I think those 4 would qualify as most important.
What's a 5th one? Do we have a 5th one?
It's not about character. But probably the most important question I have on the questionnaire that I give out to literally all of the players that I run games for is, what kind of player are you? And I have a list of different things that people enjoy about playing tabletop role-playing games, and I ask them to pick at least 2. Mm-hmm. Because what that tells me is exactly how to make you have fun at my table.
Yeah.
And ever since I started doing that, I think that one thing has been the biggest leap in my game running skill, is having players answer that question and tailoring how I run the game based on their answers.
That's huge in just terms of like game prepping your table for what to expect. I've always been a very my DM style. I've always really liked the RPS. You know, that's just the kind of DM I am. I'm probably like a 70-30 RP combat, and you know that doesn't work for some people.
It really doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also run. There's always going to be several sessions that I run that just don't have combat. None.
Yeah.
Maybe we might roll like 5 dice in 2 hours.
Yeah. You know, when we're on our third shopping session, I'm like, all right, guys, let's pick it up now. But
shopping's a different story. Shopping, I really don't like unless I've prepared like a shop for them. I usually just like gloss over it and get over it as quickly as possible if they just like need supplies.
Yeah, my party has a bad habit of adopting shopkeepers they like.
Oh, so. No.
Yeah, and I made the mistake of giving them a keep too. So.
They're turning into a resource management game, isn't it?
Foster's home for wayward shopkeeps. You know. Sorry.
Fred's one question is always connecting the character to the villain's threat or adventure goal. Yes. That is one thing that I'm going to have to try. I've actually never asked them that question. I feel like it would be difficult because of spoilers. I like having secrets in my game for the players to discover. And if you ask them a question about the villainous threat, there is that it shouldn't be too difficult to get around. I don't know. I'm thinking about it. Wouldn't be an issue. This is the first time I've ever considered it, so bear with me for a second.
The way I like that thought, but like you said, I have the inner thought of it's difficult to do that too. But the way I kind of think about that is, or the way I would ask that is, maybe the fifth question I would ask is, what's your 30, 60, 90 of your character? Like if your character succeeded in your character's goals, like right now as it is, the world is all you've ever known. You're level 1 druid, whatever. That's everything you know. But what would your character's goal be? What are your character's aspirations? Right? And then that way you have a guideline, not a guideline per se, but you have, a line between where they currently are, where they want to go, and you have all that space to put a big wall between them and their goal.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's how I would do that. But then again, I don't know. I've never asked that, and I don't know if I would, because I don't know if... Because, man, I'd find a way to make it their problem. That's why every single one of my PCs, family members are going to die if they don't give me a better backstory. So, I'm cruel.
I like Charles's idea of... we're going to call it the Cotton Eye Joe rule. Where do they come from? Where do they go?
Yeah, literally. It's perfect.
It's truly amazing.
That's actually amazing. Yeah.
I'm gonna totally steal that. I'm sorry, Charles, but I'm gonna steal that. I'm using that. I'm calling it the Cotton Eye Joe rule.
That's perfect. I think you just gave that to both of us now. So every session 0 we ever do, we'll both say, "All right, I need your Cotton Eye Joe, everyone."
Give me your Cotton Eye Joe.
Yeah. But actually, you know what? That's how to RPG. You don't spoil it, but there's clues in the adventure that are foreshadowed. 100%. And I love that, because I'll take an example of what I currently have. One of our players, and I was making fun of him earlier. It's the amnesia thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it worked in this sense because, when I learned that at session 0 about his character, right? He says, I don't know why this occurred. All I know is this information. And I say, you know what? Great, I can work with that. But that allowed me to easily tie it into the story of, why that occurred. There you go. It's because this happened way over there because of this son of a gun over here. Whereas the family person who's, gave me a page and a half backstory, I might not have a direct attachment as to, this directly affected them per se, but I could very easily attach something like, her missing father to something over here. Maybe he's in cahoots, or maybe he's been discussing, or maybe he's working actively against this. There's a lot of ways you can do that without flat out, I think, saying to the players or the party members, like, there's bad things going on. How has that affected your time here? On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you like the world? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I would find it tricky, and I've honestly not put a lot of thought into it, but that's my initial thought.
I think definitely asking a question about the villain up front for session 0 or character creation is a brilliant idea, and I need to write it down. That's how good it is. I need to start doing this.
Right next to Cotton Eye Joe.
Yes, Cotton Eye Joe rule and the,
Maybe he is the
villain question rule.
Where did he come from? Where did he go?
We don't know, and we're terrified.
No one knows! Guys, I'm scared. Oh, no.
All right, I think with that, we've learned a lot just from this one conversation. Thank you so much for being here, Lee. This has been a blast, even though it was completely unplanned.
You know what? Next time you need me, just try not to send me 30 messages in the span of 20 seconds, okay?
Sure, I'll do exactly what I did this time and send one to a mass of people and hope a fish bites.
Perfect. Great. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Charles and Fred, for stopping by, and anyone else if you're there. We appreciate you stopping by. It was fun interacting with you two in chat. Cotton Eye Joe rule, ask about the relationship to the villains. I'll remember that. Thank you, everybody. Good night or good morning if you're somewhere other than the United States time zones. And remember, everything is going to be okay.